Hey, this is Alan Powell from Anthem Lights. You're listening to Dispatch Radio.
We have a great guest back with us, folks. You remember Brian Godawa from when we talked about Noah. We talked about it before the film. We talked about it during the film. We talked a lot about the spirituality and Hollywood and what they make. He's an author, a screenwriter himself. We could talk about some of that as well and just some great stuff. Brian, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Listen, I know last time we talked, we were really on the very early end of 2014's explosion of some faith-based films, and I thought, especially with your, Hollywood Worldviews is a great book. I think it's headed into its 9th printing now or so. So congratulations on that. And
thanks.
Really, it's definitely a lot of insight on, especially from the Christian community, on some of the impact in Hollywood and what they do and how they see things. And there's been a lot of stuff that's come out since then. Obviously, the impact of Heaven is for Real and Son of God and God's Not Dead, and now Mom's Night Out, and then of course most recently is Affirm's picture, When the Game Stands Tall. Did you get a chance to see any of these? Any special thoughts that you'd like to speak to any of those pictures in particular?
Yeah, I haven't got to see as many as I would have liked to, just even in terms of the interest. But I've interacted with some people on them and heard about some of them, and I think that it's fantastic that there's a real openness now to engaging with some of the Christian religious notions, not just non-Christian religious notions in Hollywood movies, and particularly Christian movies as a genre, because of the success of some outstanding successes of movies like God's Not Dead. It's really, as well as obviously before that was Courageous and those movies. That's kind of an interesting doorway. But nevertheless, I still think that, the Christian movie genre still tends to suffer from that sort of the cliche-ridden, Christian triumphalism of God's Not Dead, where like sort of Christians are the big winners and atheists are the big losers all the time. There's not a lot of nuance, but as well as, you've got the more, the more mainstream movies like Heaven's for Real, which I did see. And that, Heaven's for Real was, unfortunately, I saw it, it was the acting was fantastic with Greg Kinnear. Without Greg Kinnear in that movie, it really wouldn't have done anything, because he did his role fantastically. But the problem was it just suffered from story. It just had a lack of story. And even though it had Randall Wallace as the writer-director on the thing, and I'm sure it did pretty well at the box office for what it was. But I just found myself kind of bored. It's all about just whatever this kid's going to tell us next that he saw on his heavenly journey, And so I personally am still not very excited about the kind of stories that are out there with the Christian, But I do think they're getting better, and I'm trying to look forward to more of them, But I just haven't been really entirely excited. There's one movie that I'm kind of intrigued at, and it's this movie coming out called The Remaining, and it's going to be out soon, and it's a horror film that's based on the rapture. Now, I have no interest in Christian rapture movies, because it seems like that's the only real creative thing that Christians have tried to come up with over the last 20, 30 years. And Left Behind, they're remaking Left Behind now. I have no interest in seeing it. There's even a secular TV series called The Leftovers that's sort of a secular interpretation of the rapture. It's such an old cliche thing, but what's so interesting about this movie coming out, and I've only seen the trailer for it, it's the only one I'm interested in seeing because they do it like a horror film. And I think it's like a found footage horror film. And, the rapture that occurs is a unique take on the rapture, where rather than all their bodies disappearing, they just sort of drop dead and their spirits are taken. And then all these... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to jump in and let you know, we've been promoting this film, and when we interviewed the director, he was the producer on Donnie Darko, Casey LaScala, and he said he started out as creating a found footage film. It developed into more, and that it centers on the 5 characters in this horror thriller, and he kind of shied away from the horror part, more thriller. But when we interviewed actress Liz Morgan, she's in it, and even Johnny Bakar, he's one of the leads. They kind of lean more towards the horror aspect as well. And one of the things I think I totally agree with you is just to not shy away from being into the horror genre, to find something that can tackle biblical themes that are so scary and intense. And I think that's where this film at least starts to at least push the door, crack the door maybe a little bit. And it comes out September 5th. We're hoping that it gets a very wide release. We're hoping that it can get some legs. We aren't going to be able to screen it ahead of time, it appears. We were in communication with them as late as even today, trying to work that out, but it doesn't appear like it's going to happen. But, folks, it's a very interesting challenge. And as you said, Brian, when the people are raptured away, their soul leaves, their eyes turn white. That's the only way you know, and their bodies just go limp. So if you imagine this happening in a world where, especially with the characters' ages are in their 20s, they're at a wedding when this happens, very secular, don't know a lot about what's going on. You just have dead bodies falling around as far as they know. It's a very frightening scene, and it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, and the trailer was cut to look like a horror film. So I don't know whether it's thriller or horror, but they're pitching it like it's horror, which is not a traditional genre for Christians. In fact, my one big concern is precisely that Christian movies tend to be very afraid to deal with evil at the level that it needs to be, and they tend to be very television-y, like 80s television, about their violence and about their evil. And I'm really concerned. I'm interested in seeing how well they deal with the evil here. But in a horror film, you've got to be scary, and you're not going to be scary if you're going to make it look like 1980s, how 1980s might deal with evil people. So, but I haven't seen it either myself, so I'm going to check it out, and I'm going to see if they're willing to, the Christian genre tends to be afraid to really push the envelope and take it where it needs to go. So we'll just have to see how well they do with it. But I'm interested in it. I'm going to go see it, whereas I'm not interested in seeing Left Behind or any of these other ones, Leftovers and all that.
There was one other one I will mention, because we did speak to the director on that as well. Derek Gates had partnered with Will Wallace, and they did one called The Appearing, which was a demon possession storyline, but it was done from a Christian angle of, instead of having the little innocent girl who didn't do anything wrong and got possessed randomly, this was more of the girl that starts to venture down, some Satan worshiping, kind of gets into Ouija boards and that kind of thing. And again, I didn't screen that one either. I keep trying to track it down. They keep telling me it's on Netflix, and when I go, I don't see it. So it's called The Appearing. It's another one too, and it was very independently done, very low distribution, didn't get picked. This was before the surge of 2014 with any faith-based support whatsoever. So look out for that one. Yeah, I want to jump ahead though, because the big one that everybody's talking about is obviously Exodus, and we briefly touched on this back in March when we were talking ahead of Noah, and that is mostly because Ridley Scott is the director. And I recently looked up interviews that he did where he speaks out, he just hates religion. He's not just an atheist, he's a moutheist. He hates God, he hates religion, and yet we're putting him in charge of making this giant big budget blockbuster thing so the studios can cash in on this faith-based trend. And the biggest concern I have is, I wanted to ask Brian's opinion, are we going to say the same thing with Noah? Are we going to change Moses?
Yeah, is it going to be a subversion? I honestly don't know. Look, he's a great filmmaker, but like you said, he's an atheist, and he says he is, and also the writer of the movie was an atheist, and he deliberately wanted to have the writer be the atheist to write it, and so God only knows what they're going to do with it. And honestly, I haven't seen anything beyond a few. I haven't even read any articles. I haven't seen anything beyond the trailers, and I almost think they've been trying to keep it under wraps because they don't want the same thing to happen to what happened to Noah. So I honestly just don't know. And I saw the trailer, and it looks kind of cool in one sense. Unfortunately, to me, the Pharaoh, the one that they have play the Pharaoh, to me just looks like he just looks weak. I mean, Joel Edgerton is a great actor, but he just doesn't look like a strong villain to me at all.
Well, they're getting bashed. They're getting bashed because they pick white characters to play Egyptians, and it looks really bad because of the makeup job, right? When you get Sigourney Weaver and Joel Edgerton in this pasty makeup with the eyeliners and all that, it just actually looks more cartoony than legitimate. And I think that has been a right criticism, to be honest. I didn't write anything on that. We didn't cover that really, but because I didn't want to get into it from a race angle, I actually went into it more of just a low quality issue that was very uncharacteristic of Ridley Scott. But I didn't want to put too much into that because let's face it, it's just a trailer, guys. I mean, who knows what the quality... Ridley Scott's track record is amazing, let's face it. No matter how bad some of the stories are, visually they're spectacular. I mean, even Prometheus, when you can leave Prometheus and have all sorts of issues with it. I know I did. But it was visually stunning. It was just breathtaking. And
absolutely. I fully agree. I one thing I know is Exodus will look really good, and that I'm interested in seeing.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. You know, God only knows. You know, and I'll blog on it on my blog at godawa.com when it comes out, and you know, we'll just have to see. We'll just have to wait and see. You know, I do know this. When he did Gladiator, one of the things that the writer David Franzoni intended to do with Gladiator was he even said, I want to make a Gladiator movie. I want to subvert the way they used to do the old Gladiator movies. And the old Gladiator movies were very positive about Christianity. And he said, look, I wanted to remake the Gladiator movies, but do the opposite and make it a pro-pagan movie.
Yep.
You know, and so why, you know, and we saw Prometheus, and in Prometheus, Ridley Scott, you know, basically said Jesus was an alien, you know, and it's the old ancient aliens baloney. I was about to cuss, BS about, you know, aliens are the source of religion. And I don't, you know, it's stupid. And Prometheus was just not a good movie anyway. But you're right, it was stunning visually. So Ridley Scott has made some bad movies, but he does tend to have such a high quality level that I'm very curious to see how well he does deal with this. So, and of course they obviously did do the miracles in a fantastic way. So, you know, who knows? We'll just have to wait.
And I think Brian would agree with me. The Gladiator is an amazing film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but let's dig on Gladiator one last time though. You're kind of a little bit of a historian like I am. I don't really remember the Romans gathering up a whole bunch of pagans in the Colosseum and doing a whole lot of that. There was enough Christians to go around to them to do that with.
Yeah. No. Well, obviously they did have gladiatorial fights, but it's interesting because if you have the DVD, they did actually have a scene of Christians being eaten by lions.
Correct.
And that's in the DVD for the deleted scenes. And quite honestly, I have to agree, it didn't fit with.
It didn't work at all, actually.
Yeah, you have to. And so I give him the credit that at least he tried to make it work, but it didn't fit with the story, and I don't blame him for not putting it in there. That's fair. You know. So and the other thing is I love the way he, you know, the writer basically wrote something that could be conceivably, you know, like Maximus was a real character in history, and he was supposedly executed. But the movie makes the premise, well, what if he wasn't? What if they thought he was executed, but he really wasn't? And that's really a cool idea that I think plays with history without trying to change it too much, you know?
Let's turn to the summer other films. We've had a ton of great films. I'm going to count summer as starting with Captain America. I know it was in April 4th, but hey, it's a big blockbuster Marvel film. That's when I'm going to start summer this year. We'll see how next year looks. But from Captain America forward, are there any other films that you're able to make it to, or anything in particular that you stuck out with that you'd like to speak on?
Oh gosh.
You see Guardians?
You got me by surprise. I'm going to see Guardians tomorrow. I haven't been able to, and I'm really bummed because I really wanted to. So, no, I can't say. Look, I got to be honest. I have not. There have been some good movies off the top of my head. None of them stand out. I'm sure you can come up with some. But in all honesty, this last year, I've been more excited and interested in television rather than movies. And the reason why is I think the best storytelling that's been going on is actually on television, not in the movies. So that's you
and I were personally talking about that a little bit, and I want to get into that. So what are some of the shows that really jump out at you? Because I'm a huge TV watcher. People here on the show know that, you know, that's my guilty pleasure, folks. I love good writing, and we are in a run, in my opinion, since Sopranos to now. There's a ton of good TV. You just may not know about it. You know, you got all these cable channels. You got TNT making stuff. You got USA now making stuff. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going. Some stuff doesn't last more than 2 or 3 seasons. Some stuff may only have one good season, but there's a lot of good television. Brian, what right now is something that you would like to bring to the table?
Yeah, well, really, you know, I got to say, some of the stuff I've been watching, like, for instance, Penny Dreadful. Penny Dreadful is a new horror series, and it's a really fascinating take where it interweaves all the old Victorian monsters into one story, whether it's Dorian Gray, Frankenstein, Dracula, werewolf. he weaves in them all together into one sort of storyline. That's a really fascinating take, and I think that there has some unique spiritual angle that they're working into that. I'm not sure where it's going yet, but that's been fascinating. I've actually, a lot of these, since Breaking Bad, I think for me, Breaking Bad was my introduction into, okay, this is the best storytelling out there. And recently you've got Ray Donovan, which is on, Game of Thrones. But the problem has been that a lot of them are very dark, very dark in their worldview, very nihilistic almost. Like the Game of Thrones, there's no good characters, Ray Donovan, there are some sort of good characters, but the hero doesn't really have much redeeming about him. At least in Breaking Bad, he was a guy, he started out as a good guy, and basically Breaking Bad was a tragedy, and it was the story of how a guy turned into a villain. So that kind of makes some sense. But these other ones like Ray Donovan and Game of Thrones, and they're good storytelling, but they tend to be almost a celebration of nihilism. However, there's a couple that go against that, and they're starting to bring in some spiritual themes in there. For instance, Fargo. I love the Fargo series because, unlike these other ones, Fargo does have a very dark world, and it's a very dark, just like the movie, it's about a very dark world and mystery. But the heroes in Fargo, there are genuinely good people in Fargo, and they tend to be sort of dorky and sort of corny. And because that's, of course, in this really dark world, these people are silly, but they end up being the heroes, and they end up being goodness is made to look desirable.
Yes.
And I think in that sense, Fargo has a real superiority because it deals with a lot of darkness, but it has goodness, and it makes goodness desirable. I love that.
And good wins out over evil. Yeah.
Yeah, and good wins out over, and in many of these, good does win out over evil, but not always,
Right. Right.
Another series that I've been really getting into is the new one, The Strain, which is another horror series, and it's about like vampires, and it's a real new one. I forgot who's doing that one.
That's Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro, yeah, and it's really he tends to bring in spirituality into his themes, and in this one there's a sort of an underlying Jewish spirituality that's coming in. The vampire killer has a Jewish past, and the vampires are sort of mocking him. Where's your God? And so it's kind of, I don't know where it's going to go with it, but I'm liking how they're interweaving some of that spirituality. And of course, The Walking Dead, which is another horror one, but The Walking Dead is a zombie series that I think the reason why it's gone on so long is because it really makes us question our meaning and our values in life by placing us in a post-apocalyptic world. And it makes you really ask your questions about what are the most important things in life. Where do we find our meaning in life? Is it in survival, or is it in self-sacrifice for others? And these are values that I think are really deep and important values to wrestle with.
And isn't that
I could keep going?
Well, isn't that why? The post-apocalyptic series have done so well. Revolution is another, but the problem is once you get away from the survival nature of the show, and it's not about self-preservation versus your self-conscious. It's either self-preservation is your conscience. Is it going to be about goodwill? Is it going to be about domination? Once you get away from that, and obviously Revolution to me jumped the shark with all the supernatural sci-fi stuff, which was so over the top, and it was like they were constantly chasing their tail to try to explain things. It kind of derailed things from that storyline. These shows really do start to kind of reflect society, right? It's why it's such appealing. We're watching Missouri's in fire, so we're watching a show like Walking Dead, and you're like, every community is asking themselves, well, what would we do? How would we react? And that's kind of the whole point of Walking Dead, right? Things it was chaos tomorrow. I think we joke at work, and as we do things, we just have this joke about the zombie apocalypse, and it's a metaphor for whatever happens, because the world can fall apart tomorrow when an atomic bomb goes off. We could have the dollar collapse. We could have, so-and-so tries to set off this kind of terrorist attack. It doesn't matter. We know there's going to be chaos. We just refer to it as the zombie apocalypse. These shows force us to examine some of that, right? That's what you're saying. That's the appeal of these shows.
Exactly. And one other one that I want to kind of go off on a different angle is The Americans. The Americans is a story, very different, but I love it because it takes place during the Reagan era of the 80s, and we're following actually a couple of Russian spies who are in America, and they are pretending to be Americans, and it's all about them trying to subvert, and it shows basically how communism really was alive and well, trying to destroy America during the 80s. And it shows, and there's got a heroic side, but it's not black and white. I mean, people are struggling with complex moral issues, and there also brings in a spiritual element where one of the spies, the Russian spies who are the heroes of the movie, again, it seems like so many of these series, the heroes are villains, right? But it shows that one of them is struggling with falling in love with America,
yes,
while the other's not. And then their kids, they're trying to hide. One of the commitments is they don't want their kids to know about communism or about that because it will endanger their lives in America. But one of their kids starts to go to church and becomes interested in Christianity, which of course is the ultimate villain to communism if you understand communism. So they're bringing in some of these spiritual elements and dealing with the reality of evil people who really were trying to undermine America. And it wasn't a fantasy, you know. So all these elements sort of coalesce into a picture that's very relevant to today as well, because, you know, with Islam, many people think, oh, Islam's not, they're not as bad as you're trying to make them out to be. They're just a different culture, and most Muslims are not terrorists. Yeah, that's true, but the reality is it is a subversive religion. So there's a lot of translation going on there that I think it makes it a very fascinating series that I've just really been enjoying.
And it is got ties, folks. If you remember, we interviewed Kosta Ronin here. He played one of the Russian spies near the close of the season that just wrapped up, and we're big fans of Kerry Russell. So yeah, we follow that show very, very closely.
Cool.
And it definitely has challenged the folks that don't believe the terrorist threats only overseas and they're not here. When you have you have a former CIA member that's helping write the show that's showing you they had embedded Soviet people here in our country, and we know this to be fact through historical document. Oliver North has been a consultant on the show and was integral in developing the Iran-Contra theme that's part of the show as well. So definitely great.
Yes.
Now, we kind of have to wrap up with Brian, and I want to get to his next book. I'm not sure what he'll actually tell us. He's got a great series that's going on, and we, of course, spend extensive amount of time talking about Noah Primeval, folks, but that's just one book in this long series that he's put together with great stuff. The new one is about David. Tell everybody a little bit about it if you can, and what can they expect. And as I understand it, we can pre-order it now on Amazon.
Yes, you can. It's called David Ascendant, and it's the 7th in the series called Chronicles of the Nephilim. And you can go to chroniclesofthenephilim.com and find out all the information, a lot of cool videos and cool freebie stuff. But basically, this is the 7th novel. It's gonna be available in November, but you can pre-order it right now on Kindle and on Amazon. And basically, the Chronicles of the Nephilim is basically a series where I'm retelling all the stories in the Bible that touch upon giants, Nephilim, and Watchers. And so there is fiction. I do take fictional liberties, but I try to make it all consistent with the Bible and address some of these particular stories that a lot of people are not really familiar with because either they don't know the Bible very well, or a lot of these stories, they're very, very subtle in the Bible. So you unless you study, you may not catch it. And the latest is, of course, the story of David. And, of course, David is the probably the most detailed narrative in the entire Bible. In fact, it's one of the most detailed narratives in ancient history about a particular individual. And so, therefore, there's a lot of novels out about David and a lot of stories retold about him. But there's one story that nobody has told, and that is, you know, we're all familiar with the story of David and Goliath, right? In fact, Goliath is the giant who David killed with the stone from the sling. But what many people don't realize is Goliath was not the only giant who was trying to kill David. Right. In the book of 1 Chronicles and the book of 2 Samuel, we read about 5 other giants who were part of a warrior cult called the Yelid HaRapha, which is sometimes translated as Descendants of the Giants, depending on what Bible version you read, or the Sons of Rapha is what I call them in the novel. And basically, it's a warrior cult who are devoted to a god, and they were giants. And several of them are mentioned by name, and several of them are not. But what I do is I go into, in my David Ascendant, I'm telling the story of that leads up to, I go into the background of Goliath and his brother. His brother is named in the Bible. His name was Lami, and they were giants from Gath, and there were some other giants. And so I tell the story of the Philistines and the Philistine warriors. I kind of go into their background, kind of like modern-day television shows, going into the villain's background. And I go into why they're after David, why they're after Israel. And then I go into David's story as well. But my story is about how these five, after Goliath is killed, so he starts out with 6 giants, and how they're going after David and how each of them are killed as they seek to kill the Messiah King of Israel. And so it's kind of a unique take on that story. And, I have the usual sort of a little bit of fantastic elements at times, but it's still basically based on that material. But, the only thing we hear about in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles is just their names and that they were trying to kill David and who killed them. So I fill in the lines with some fictional stuff and make it kind of a more fascinating journey. So it's all about David as he rises to become king, and it sort of ends with him becoming king, and that's where the story ends. But yeah, so that's the take on David Ascendant, and I think people will really find it fascinating.
You can pre-order that on Amazon. We'll make sure we get the link there so you can click over to that, get your pre-order in on that. It's available in November. And, of course, it's always great to have Brian on with us, some great insight. We love talking pop culture on this show. So, folks, we're going to have more of that. We'll have to have Brian on more regularly to catch up with us, because if we're going to tap into TV, there will be no shortage of things for us to talk about, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brandon.